how to go backwards. So let's start with an example. So let's start with our first problem here. We want to factor x squared plus 7x plus 10. Okay, and I did a nice, everything's nice and positive for us, and then when things are positive, it usually tends to make things a lot easier. So what we want to do is I'm going to go ahead and draw out my parentheses because I know that's what I'm aiming to get. I want two parentheses. I also know since this is just an x squared, and my first term in each one is going to be an x, because remember, to get the first term here, I do my first times my first. So x times x gives me that x squared. So now let's talk about, because I got to figure out what these two numbers are going to be in my parentheses. So this is where my puzzle comes into play. So this is where my logic happens. So I need two numbers that one multiply to 10, and that number two, they add to a positive 7. Now, because everything is positive, I'm multiplying to a positive 10, I'm adding to a positive 7. I know my numbers are going to both be positive. So if I want to, I could go ahead and put a plus and a plus in here because everything's already positive. Now, the next thing I need to talk about is actually those numbers. And it is always, guys, easier to find the numbers that multiply to the number first. Always do that multiplication first. That's one of the reasons we listed it first. So if you think about the number 10, there's really only two things that multiply to 10. That's 1 and 10. But when you do 1 plus 10, you would get 11, so that wouldn't work. And the other set is 2 and 5. Well, then if I do 2 plus 5, I do indeed get 7. So there's my pair that I want to use, 2 and 5. And it doesn't matter which one I put into which place, as long as I have x plus 2 and x plus 5. And the other really cool thing is if you're unsure of your answer, all you have to do is use your FOIL, and you'll check your answer to see if it's right, as long as it matches back up with our trinomial we had just above. All right, so let's try another problem. So let's look at what happens when I want to factor and my middle term is negative. So let's do x squared minus 8x. But I still have a positive on the end, so let's say we're going to, how about we do 12. Okay, so we have x squared minus 8x plus 12. Again, we can go ahead and draw our parentheses. We know that's going to be in our answer. We also know we're going to start off with an x on both of those. So again, we want to 1 multiply to 12. And number 2, this time we want to add to a negative 8. So I want you to kind of think about this, because we talked about sign laws before, and one of the things we talked about was if you had two positives, that multiplied to a positive. But it also gives you a positive if you have two negatives. So all this positive 12 is telling you is that your signs will be the same. Okay, so the signs of the two parentheses will be the same. They'll either both be positive or they're going to both be negative. This guy, he is going to give you the specifics. He is actually telling you that they are both negative. And the reason he's telling you they're both negative is because if they have to be the same sign, they're either both positive or both negative, and I want a negative answer when I add, that means I have to owe you money, so they both have to be negative. So now we're going to start looking for our pair of numbers. So again, I'm thinking of 12. And now I'm writing down all the pairs. You definitely don't have to do that. You can just, if you know the answer, you can just put that in, and that's perfectly fine. So I would start with -1 and -12. But again, when I add those together, remember I'm adding negatives, so I'm going to add them and keep their sign. That'd give me -13, so that's not going to work. If I did -2 and -6, I'm going to add those together. So 6 plus 2 would give me a -8. Oh, wait, there it is. There's my -8 I was looking for. So that means that's my pair of numbers. I can just stop, and I can put in my parentheses x minus 2x minus 6. All right, so let's try another problem. Let's talk about what happens. Spin up the signs just a little bit here. Let's do x squared plus 3x minus 10. Okay, so now I've made that last sign negative. We haven't seen that one yet as a practice problem. So let's talk about what happens with that. But again, I can go ahead and start off with my parentheses. I know I'm going to have the 2 parentheses there. All right, my rules over here is I need to now multiply to negative 10. And the second thing I need to do is add to a positive 3. Now, again, we're going to think about our multiplication, our sign rules for multiplication. And the only way to get a negative number when you're multiplying is to do a positive times a negative. So these are going to have different signs. And this guy, he's going to tell you that the larger sign, in this case, is positive. Because if I have opposite signs, one's positive and one's negative, and I want them to add up to a positive number, then remember I subtract and take the sign of the larger number. So I have to have the 3 be, or the larger number be positive so that my 3 is positive. But again, I'm going to look at my multiples of 10. So there's not a whole lot of multiples of 10 here. We've got 1 and 10. And remember, my larger sign is positive. That means this is going to be a negative 1 and a positive 10. But when I combine that, I would get 9. So that's not right because I wanted it to be 3. So then I could have 2 and 5. Again, my larger sign is positive, so this is a positive 5 and a negative 2. When you do negative 2 plus 5, that indeed does give us 3. So there's our answer, and there's our pairs. So in our parentheses, we're going to put minus 2 and plus 5. Okay. One more example here. Let's do what happens, still doing our factoring. We've got x squared minus 2x minus 15. Okay, so starting out the same way. We're going to do our parentheses. We're going to lead off with x on both of these. Okay, we need to multiply to a negative 15. And the second thing we need to do is add to a negative 2. Now again, think about what we just did on the previous problem. We had that multiplying to negative 10 and we said our signs were different. So since we're multiplying to a negative 15 here, again, we have different signs. One negative, one positive. Now this time, because I want my answer to be negative, my larger number is negative. Guys, on that second portion when we're talking about the addition part, your larger number should always match signs, whatever you want your addition to be in the center. So if it's negative, our larger number is negative. If it's positive, our larger number is positive. So pulling out 15 here, again, we could do 1 and 15. This would be a negative 15 since my larger number is my negative. Little. But when I combine that, I get a negative 14, so that doesn't work. My only other set that multiplies to 15 is 3 and 5. Again, my larger number, which is our 5, is the negative, so 3 minus 5 would give us negative 2. That is exactly what we wanted in our addition for that second piece. So there's our pair, and this would be plus 3 minus 5, and that would be our answer. I hope this helps you with the factoring.